This is a paper 210C, Cutting Short the Time. Now, Christ uttered what appears to be the most puzzling of comments regarding God cutting short the time. What does it mean? So we see the text in Matthew chapter 24, beginning in verse 4. And Jesus answered them, "Take heed that no one leads you astray. For many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and they will lead many astray. And you will hear of wars and rumours of wars. See that you are not alarmed. For this must take place, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All this is but the beginning of the birth pangs. Then they will deliver you up to tribulation and put you to death. And you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And then many will fall away and betray one another and hate one another, and many false prophets will arise and lead many astray. And because wickedness is multiplied, most men's love will grow cold. But he who endures to the end will be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations. And then the end will come. So when you see the desolating sacrilege spoken of by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place, let the reader understand, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let him who is on the housetop not go down to take what is in his house. And let him who is in the field not turn back to take his mantle. And alas for those who are with child and for those who give suck in those days. Pray that your flight may not be in winter or on a Sabbath, for then there will be great tribulation, such as has not been from the beginning of the world until now, no, and never will be. And if those days had not been shortened, no human being would be saved, but for the sake of the elect those days will be shortened. Then if anyone says to you, Lo, here is the Christ, or there he is, do not believe it, for the false Christs and false prophets will arise and show great signs and wonders, so as to lead astray, if possible, even the elect. Now let's look at this concept of cutting the time short. To understand this prophecy, one must unpack the elements mentioned by Christ. We've been plagued by false Christs over the centuries from all walks of life. We've seen the laws of God done away and the entire structure of the pseudo-Christian church, where God's calendar, covered in number 156, has been done away from 70 CE. The false Christians changed the Sabbath to Sunday to attract and appeal to the Baal worshippers of the mystery and sun cults. The calendar was changed to the Babylonian system as explained by the prophets, and from verse 15 onwards we see that the prophecy of Daniel is held to stand fast in its authenticity. These prophecies interlink, as we see, from Isaiah to Jeremiah, Ezekiel and Daniel onto the 12 prophets to Malachi, ending the early canon. Now the texts of Christ's prophecy show that God has already shortened the days when Christ spoke. God in his omniscience, covered in predestination, paper number 296, saw what the long-term effects would be. That also is explained in the problem of evil, number 118. God had acted to shorten the days even before Christ was on earth. However, the cutting short was for the sake of the elect yet to come. We see that the latter prophets all developed from the Psalms to the Messiah and the apostles of the churches of God, covered in number F0191, F0192, 3, 4, 5, 1, 5, 2, and 5, 3. It's covered also in the F023 series, F024 series, F025, F026 series, and the F027 series. The prophecies all tie into the last days, and you'll see that covered also in the prophecy of Pharaoh's broken arms, number 036 and 036 underline 2, and also F027, 11, 12, and 13, and the F066 series dealing with Revelation. So at the time of Christ, we see that God had already cut the time short so that it would not affect the elect at the very end. However, when was it done? When does the Bible indicate it happened? Is there a record? The cause of the cutting short of the time happened from the very time that Satan sinned with the creation, and that was when he told Adam and Eve that they would not surely die. That was a lie, leading them to sin and effectively to change the course of human history. This was the lie of the immortal soul doctrine, and you'll see that covered in the soul number 092. This lie caused Adam and Eve to sin, and you see also that aspect in the doctrine of original sin, part 1, number 246, and part 2, the generations of Adam, number 248. Let's look at now at the conflict of the texts. To identify the time frame, we must examine the two texts available to us. That is the Septuagint and the later Masoretic text. We have identified the discrepancy in the text outline, timetable of the age number 272. The Septuagint was a translation of the early Hebrew text around 200 BCE, before 160 CE, and the construction of the temple at Heliopolis under order of Ananias IV, which was done in accordance with the prophecy of Isaiah 19 verse 19. Now we'll look now at Appendix B to 272. You'll see that the Septuagint, the LXX, differs from the timing of the lineage of the patriarchs in the Masoretic text, and both cannot be correct. The timeline continues in the line of the kings from the Masoretic text. The creation timeline of the Masoretic text can be reconstructed precisely. The commencement year is 4004 BCE, and Ussher's chronology arrived at that date fairly accurately, even though some things were unknown at the time. The explanation for the huge difference between the two texts is at first perplexing. One has to look at the facts of the history of the Ptolemies in Egypt to understand what is happening. Josephus records how the Septuagint came about. We would expect the Septuagint to be correct as it is quoted by the New Testament Church. The problem is easily explained when we realize that Greek was the language of the entire Church over the Hellenized world and was used in Rome itself for the first 2 or more centuries. That is, the centuries of the Church. Genesis in the Septuagint is the very reason that Paul issued his comments in the New Testament in 1 Timothy 1:4 and Titus 3:9. The Septuagint is reliable except for the book of Genesis and the contradiction of 440 years from the Exodus to the commencement of the building of the temple. The Septuagint says 440 and the Masoretic text says 480 years. This conflict is easily resolved if we assume one is quoting the end of the Exodus and entry to Canaan, and the other is recording the beginning of the Exodus from Goshen. Genesis, however, is another matter. There is a difference of some 1425 years between the two texts, and both cannot be correct. The answer is simple if we understand that at the same time Ptolemy II was creating the great library at Alexandria, and that he had given instructions to compile the histories of the world. Manetho, the Egyptian historian, was commanded to compile the history of Egypt. He was aware of and was trying to compete with Berossus the Chaldean, who was writing the history of Chaldea. Egypt and Chaldea were competing for the oldest civilization of the world, and the writers of the Septuagint were faced with making some accord possible between their extended reigns. We know that they were all wrong in the dynasties and the regnal years by an extended period. When we examine the Septuagint and the Masoretic text, we are faced with an obvious conclusion. That is, that round figures of up to 100 years are added to the ages of the patriarchs at the birth of their sons, and some ages were incorrect. to extend their lives, to take the beginning of creation back to accommodate the errors of Manetho. A separate paper will be issued on the history of Egypt to show the errors of Manetho and the correct placement of the dynasties in accordance with their real history and their relationship to the record of the canonical text. What follows is the record of both the Septuagint and the Masoretic text in table form to enable the early errors of the Septuagint to be seen against the canonical or Masoretic text. The table is compiled showing both Septuagint and Masoretic text and continues on in the line of the kings on the Masoretic text. The errors and confusion of the line of the kings of Israel and Judah are caused by differing calendars under the influence of the Assyrian civil calendar, which continued into rabbinical Judaism. And the reconciliation has been provided by Edwin R. Thiel, but he himself is held to have made an error in the reign of Hezekiah. The following is our biblical reconstruction of the dates, and the reconstruction shows a coherent view of the Bible text and eliminates the errors claimed to exist in the text. The book of Genesis in the Septuagint is not a received text. It has not been used or incorporated into either the Judaic or Christian canons of the Bible. What follows then is the table of the age according to the Septuagint and the Masoretic text, completed at Annexure A. It's obvious from the two texts that there is a discrepancy, that one is shorter than the other, and the contradictions with Manetho may also disguise Assyrian deficiency in the time frames that saw a time sequence deducted from the beginning affected by the sin of Satan in deceiving the young under his charge and care. The Masoretic text allows for the smooth flow of the three time sequences, as we saw in the text of Numbers 282a, 282b and 282c, dealing with the rule of the kings, and follows the division in accord with the life of Moses, and also allows for the establishment of Israel as God foretold Abraham. However, we will never determine the exact differences between the ages of the patriarchs and the time taken from the end to enable the exact time cut short to be exactly determined. For that exactitude, we will have to wait on the Messiah. After all, he was there when it happened. And you see that covered in the pre-existence of Christ, number 243. Follows then is the table of the age according to the Septuagint and the Masoretic text, covered through from Adam on through into the rule of the kings and the personages associated with those rules.